November 2017. Inside the headquarters of the Philippine Stock Exchange, traders erupt in applause. That year, foreign direct investment into the Philippines hit $10 billion, 5 times higher than what it had been just a few years before. Money was pouring in from America, China, Japan, and Europe, all betting on the future of this tiny country's economy. And the Philippines was quickly becoming rich. In just the last 20 years, average incomes in the country had more than doubled. But as their influence has grown, one country in particular is starting to take notice: China. The Chinese Communist Party now regards the Philippines as a top strategic priority in its growing rivalry with the US. In just the past 2 decades, Beijing has funneled around $9.1 billion of investments into the Philippines, making it one of China's largest borrowers in Southeast Asia. In many ways, this is a massive asset. The investment has helped fund massive infrastructure projects, fueling the country's economy, and projections now expect the Philippines to be one of the fastest growing Asian economies for decades to come. But as is always the case, money doesn't come for free. Every dollar received from China risks jeopardizing the country's decades-old alliance with another global superpower, the United States. The truth is that nobody knows who the country may end up siding with. It's a choice that will end up not only shaping the country's future, but tipping the balance in the growing competition for global dominance. This is how a seemingly insignificant country became one of the most important battlegrounds for the future world order. The Philippines isn't like most countries. It's a jigsaw puzzle of over 7,000 islands scattered across the Pacific. Beautiful, yes, but for developing a country, it's an absolute nightmare. That's because, unlike most other countries, the Philippines doesn't have a single connected landmass where you can easily build highways, rail links, or factories. Every major city is cut off by water, meaning that even the simplest supply chains require huge amounts of planning. The World Bank estimates that logistic costs in the Philippines eat up 27% of GDP, nearly double the regional average, and shipping goods from one island to another can sometimes cost more than sending them all the way to China. All of this made factory production basically impossible, which is of course how countries normally get their first rung on the development ladder. This meant when its neighbours like South Korea and Taiwan began to rapidly industrialise in the 60s, the Philippines began to slowly fall behind. By the start of the 2000s, a huge economic gap had emerged. The average Filipino worker was making almost 6 times less than their counterparts in South Korea or Taiwan. This dynamic led to the country developing a really strange economic model. Because there were so few job opportunities at home, more and more Filipinos began to leave the country, mostly to their neighbours who were already richer. Today, over 10 million Filipinos now live abroad, which is nearly 1 in 10 people across the entire country, gone, and most likely not to return. But while they might not be living in the country anymore, their families generally still rely on them for financial support. A huge 9.4% of the Philippines' entire GDP is made up from remittances, aka payments sent back home, one of the highest ratios in the world, more than tripling the global average of 3%. The point is, thanks in no small part to the country's geography, it has become almost entirely dependent on remittances to keep the economy afloat. That's not an ideal position to be in for a country that's trying to develop its industrial base. Instead, to get the country going, the government has had to look in a different direction. And to be fair, its geography does provide at least one major advantage: its strategic position between the US and China. The Philippines sits right on the edge of the South China Sea, one of the most hotly contested waters on Earth. Roughly a third of global shipping passes through here every year, and crucially, 43% of global oil. Control of this passage can make or break a global empire, and will almost certainly be a key factor in the US-China rivalry. Needless to say, China cares a huge amount about maintaining allies in this region, and that meant that when Beijing first rolled out its Belt and Road Initiative, the Philippines was one of the first countries on the list. Xi Jinping himself called the country one of China's most important allies. So for the past few decades, China has been spending huge amounts of money helping develop the country. Chinese investment now accounts for over 22% of all total FDI, and of that large share, over half is being directly spent on infrastructure projects. Luckily for the Philippines, this is exactly what was needed. After all, the country wanted to compete with its rivals. It would need some of the best infrastructure in the world. But thanks in large part to China, this is what the country now has. Over the last decade, infrastructure spending has increased by over 500% and now accounts for nearly 6% of the country's entire economy, which is double the regional average. And the results are already starting to show. Before we look more at this, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Enquiries. If you use the internet as much as I do, then your personal data is already out there, scattered across personal search sites, online directories, and even commercial databases. Data brokers collect and sell it without your consent, and according to the annual breach report, this number is up 211% from 2023 to 2024. That means criminals, stalkers, or even employers can easily access sensitive details like your address, phone number, and family info. That's why Enquiries is so valuable. With just one sign up, they legally contact hundreds of data brokers on your behalf and get your data removed. If it reappears, they go after it again. You can even use their custom removal feature. Just send them any link where your info is exposed and a privacy expert will take care of it. And unlike shady players in the space, Enquiries is the first and only data removal service independently verified by Deloitte, so you know it actually works. It's 3 simple steps: create an account, authorize them to act, and let Enquiries do the rest. Plus, it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to enquiries.com/invisiblehand and use the code INVISIBLEHAND to get 60% off an annual plan. Now, let's get back to the video. Businesses who would have previously ignored the country are starting to view it as a valuable new opportunity. In 2011, the Philippines' FDI inflow was at $2 billion, but by 2017, that number had increased by 5 times, surpassing $10 billion. All this new investment has helped the country achieve rapid rates of economic growth, and since 2010, the Philippines has averaged annual GDP growth of around 5%, outpacing the likes of Thailand, Malaysia, and nearly all of its other neighbours. In fact, the country has gone from being a huge underachiever to being the second fastest growing economy in the region, right behind Vietnam. But it's not just thanks to the country's newfound infrastructure that it's becoming rich. It's also got a crucial advantage, and one which can make it one of the most important countries in the region in just a couple decades' time: its population. The Philippines has one of the youngest workforces in East Asia, with a median age of just 26, which is almost 2 decades younger than in Europe. For the Philippines, this is a huge asset. At the most basic level, a younger population means more workers entering the economy than leaving it, and that translates into higher productivity, more tax revenue, and a bigger consumer base to drive demand. Economists call this the demographic dividend, and history shows it's often the single biggest factor that drives economic growth. Of course, this is also providing a huge opportunity for China. Its own population is rapidly aging. The median age there is already 39, and that's rising fast, and it means that soon it's going to be suffering the exact opposite of a demographic dividend. But the Philippines offers an opportunity to alleviate some of this burden. The country has millions of young, low-cost, English-speaking workers who can fill factories, staff service industries, and even support China's tech supply chains. In short, the two countries' economies are almost perfectly complementing each other. The Philippines can provide a young workforce in one of the key strategic locations in Asia, all the while China can provide the country with massive amounts of investment in infrastructure it needs to get the economy off the ground. On paper, it's a perfect partnership, but that doesn't mean it's one without risk, because while China might be one of the world's most important economies, there's another country which developing nations also rely heavily on, the biggest economy in the world, the United States. And here's where the situation gets a bit more difficult, because the same waters that make the Philippines a dream for global trade also make it a key target in the power struggle between the US and China. Whoever secures influence here doesn't just win an ally, they get to tighten their grip over the very heart of global trade, and the US is desperate to prevent China from doing this. Given its strategic location in the South China Sea, sitting right along critical shipping lanes and just a few hundred miles away from Taiwan, the country could be a key player if a war between Taiwan and China were to break out. Thanks to this, the US has been ramping up its military presence in the small island nation. In just the last few years, the Pentagon has poured billions into upgrading bases, building new airstrips, and even setting up fuel and weapons depots across Luzon and Palawan, positions deliberately chosen because they sit right on China's doorstep. As of 2024, 9 Enhanced Defense Corporation agreement sites were already spaced across the country. Their bases aren't just for show, they position the Philippines as a potential frontline territory in any future flashpoint between Washington and Beijing. And this puts the Philippines in a tricky situation. On the one hand, US protection gives the country a powerful security guarantee against an increasingly assertive China, who doesn't exactly have a history of being the best neighbour. But at the same time, China is the Philippines' largest trading partner, providing the investments, infrastructure, and markets that fuel its economy. And so far, the Philippines has managed to avoid choosing sides, But that looks increasingly like an impossible task. As the US-China relationship grows more tense, nations are being forced to pick sides. The US wants reliable allies who will stand by them in a time of crisis, and China wants economic partners who won't undermine their strategic ambitions. To each superpower, neutral can quickly start to look like unreliable. And there's a real risk that by trying to keep both Washington and Beijing on side, the country risks ruining its relationship with both. But that's not the only challenge facing the country's prospects, because while rapid rates of economic growth certainly make the country a bigger player on the international stage, that doesn't necessarily mean the benefits feed through to the average citizen. It all depends on how these gains are distributed. After all, if rising GDP coincides with massive increases in inequality, the average person might not see any real increase to their standards of living, and that's exactly what's been happening in the Philippines. The country has one of the highest levels of inequality in all of Asia, with a Gini coefficient of 42.3, well above the global average of 35, and surpassing all of its neighbours. Today, the richest 50 families alone are worth more than $86 billion. At the same time, nearly 1 in 3 Filipinos live below the poverty line. Of course, it's not like there aren't solutions to this. Many countries in East Asia used progressive taxation, strong welfare systems, and massive investment in education to narrow inequality while still growing rapidly. And it's actually quite normal for developing economies to struggle with inequality during their growth takeoff. The same happened in places like China and India. The real test is whether they can implement reforms before the gap becomes politically destabilizing. But in the case of the Philippines, getting these reforms through might be harder than you think. The country has a long history of corruption and political capture, and in 2024 it scored just 33 out of 100 in the Corruption Perceptions Index, ranking a disappointing 114th in the world. That means elites not only hold onto their wealth, but often shape the very rules of the game to protect it, making redistributive policies far more difficult to push through. And this is the Philippines' paradox. On paper, it has everything it needs to become one of the great economic success stories of the 21st century. A young population, strategic geography, and rapid growth. But unless it can solve its inequality problem and rein in corruption, that country could end up stuck in the low income trap. There's no doubt that the Philippines has come a long way, from being the sick man of Asia to one of the region's fastest growing economies. The country has impressively written its fate, breaking down the geographical barriers that had held it back for decades through bold infrastructure. But the challenges remain. Geography, politics, and global tensions still cast long shadows. The question now isn't whether the Philippines can keep growing, it's whether it can build an economy resilient enough to withstand the storms ahead. With its young workforce, strategic location, and bold infrastructure, the Philippines has all the pieces to become the next superpower of Asia. For the Philippines, the future is a vast, uncharted ocean, but this time the winds seem to be blowing in its favour. The real question is, will it seize this moment or fail to overcome the challenges? Only time will tell, but one thing is clear, the Philippines is no longer just a country to watch, it's a country ready to lead. Before we end, I just wanted to mention that we've launched a new channel, The Invisible Game, where we uncover the hidden economics shaping your life. Our latest video shows the surprising reason your electricity bill keeps rising: AI data centers. You can watch it here or by clicking the link in the description.